Can you say something so I can see if I hear you?
LaToya Cantrell, LaToya.
How you doing?
Doing pretty good. How about you? Good to see you.
Thanks for taking the time.
Oh yes, we messed up last year.
Yeah, we were.
Got crazy. Preparing for the start of this session, legislative session, which started yesterday. Okay, so in reflecting back on Broadmoor and in the post-Katrina environment, the galvanizing force was really when the city of New Orleans government and certain leaders, city leaders, were recommending that Broadmoor not return, that it not be rebuilt. And it was not equivalent to what was about 7 neighborhoods that were slated. And while you referenced Lakeview as being a lower lying area, it was not one that was recommended to not return. But Broadmoor, my neighborhood, was. And so that we took great offense to that, especially understanding that we had just undergone a SEALA project, a Southeast Louisiana drainage project, and where millions of infrastructure improvements were invested in the heart of the Broadmoor community. And also with a real sign that the Broadmoor neighborhood actually did very well when Katrina came our way. It was when the levees failed, where we were inundated with water, and the water set for 3 weeks. So it wasn't one that the rain caused us to flood. It was the failures of the levees that did so. And we were able to see really in real time how far the water came up, and the neighborhood was not underwater. Mm-hmm. So it was those things that really galvanized us to, one, plan for our future. And of course, flood mitigation was a priority for us and embedded in our planning process that we underwent. Well, first of all, there was a massive planning process that the community led itself through. A part of that was subdividing the community into 3 natural parts. One where we said it was subgroup A, which is the tip of Broadmoor as it's shaped like a triangle. The right was subgroup B, which was the majority African American area, majority rental community, majority blighted properties, slum lords, drug trafficking, low performing school, mediocre library. Subgroup C was higher income in terms of more of our white community, our residents on that particular, embedded in that subgroup, more home ownership, more wealth. And so we found that as we subdivided ourselves was the planning process, one, to get a real sense of what were the priorities from residents where they lived, but also understanding that Broadmoor was a microcosm of the city of New Orleans demographically and social economically. And what we learned through that is really that the strong need the weak and the weak need the strong. So a part of what you're asking about the proposed bike lanes, well, subgroup C was adamant that as we rebuilt back better, that we also look towards connecting the city's fabric, connecting Broadmoor to the rest of the fabric via bike lanes. Subgroup B wasn't necessarily against bike lanes. However, they wanted to be safe riding a bike. And so that's where the tension kind of grew. But it was only a need for people, residents, to understand one another. And that was made possible through dialogue, with listening to one another, and having a greater understanding is that we all wanted the same thing. It was just how we were going to get there together. And so based on that dialogue, bike paths were a part of our redevelopment plan, just wasn't the top priority within that plan. So today, you have bike lanes in Broadmoor that's connected to the rest of the city's fabric, but you also have what we believe is a safer community as well. Less slum, dealing with blight. We have a great school. We have a great library, which is a community center. We have a fine arts and wellness center. So all of those things grew bottom up from the community and their planning efforts, which they prioritized what we were going to rebuild first and how it was going to be a reflection of the entire neighborhood, not just a certain section of the neighborhood. Well, I think on the front end, it's about educating the public in terms of what really happens when rain falls and you can't drain it as fast as it's falling. And so the need to free up our drains, pretty much hold that water so that, again, it not only works well with our system, but it keeps our neighborhood dry. So with that education became very clear that we needed to create alternative ways to store water. So we integrated our priorities of holding water in plans for our library, for example, where we are holding over 1 million gallons of water that fall in that community, whether it was how the roof was structured. So the water runs down, it flows, then it flows into a bioswale that collects that water. The Wilson Charter School is another example of that. We were able to build not only flood walls around the school and bioswales, but we were able to integrate a cistern that sits on the campus and, again, holding that rainwater, freeing it up from going right into the drains. So it was a multifaceted approach, but it came through educating our people. And what we learned was that we were educating the leadership of the city of New Orleans when we initially proposed holding water on our library campus, and quite frankly, when we proposed holding water on our school campus, we were told that, wait a minute, I remember, oh, LaToya, we're going to have people drowning in Broadmoor. And it's like, well, no, we're not creating a swimming pool. It's actually going to hold water that you will not be able to swim in, but it will only subside, one, with time, but it's not a cesspool. It's not a mosquito mound. So there were multiple things that we were hearing literally from leadership saying that we should move forward. But when I think about where we are today, and how far the city has come through that leadership, meaning that we demonstrated at that community level. Now we're in a city that has embraced green infrastructure significantly to where we have projects that are underway and have actually been redeveloped in our community, and we see them working. So it's been a lot of education over the past 15 years where we're seeing the results. Well, what it takes is to show them how it works. So yes, you're actually out there in the rain. We had meetings in the rain so that people would understand just in a normal setting without the green infrastructure what we were up against. But then also after the fact, once it's been developed, then you actually go and you stand on that flood wall, that bioswale, and you look at how the rain flows from the roof into the swale. And you also look at the vegetation that is in the swale where it is evaporating that water and it's freeing it up from going into the drain. And so you can see it. And I think that's one key indicator that sometimes people have to see in order to believe, which that works against us, I think, as well. But that was a turning point, I would say, not only within the Broadmoor community, but within the city of New Orleans, when we were able to show them that it worked and we were able to access private money to make it work and not government money. So we were so serious about it, and as a result, we kind of led the way to green infrastructure in the city of New Orleans today. Well, I think that I've always had to depend on others to do the work, especially as a community organizer and a neighborhood leader. You cannot do it by yourself. in terms of lessons kind of learned or things that were helpful or beneficial to the results, were how we organized the community to actually listen to the community, ensuring that it was a bottom-up approach, but also how we subdivided the community in terms of engagement. But every week we had one topic that each subgroup met on. That following week, I brought that community back as a community so that we can hear the voices from everyone, so that it wasn't dominated by one particular section of the community. And we did this on every subject, whether it was education, public health, housing, economic development, or green infrastructure, flood mitigation. And so it just proved to be an effective strategy because it brought out the fact that the strong need the weak and the weak need the strong. I'll never forget when I was advocating for our community to have a temporary library while we were raising money and pushing for Keller to come back. And I had residents in subgroup C and those on Napoleon Avenue that were very upset that I was going to have our library be in a FEMA trailer so that residents could have access to these resources that they needed. So I listened to the community. I met them on Napoleon Avenue. I met with them for over an hour, listening to them as to why we don't need a library as a FEMA trailer, because there were no FEMA trailers on Napoleon Avenue. And I listened, but I had to remind them that, hey, we have people living in FEMA trailers, and you mean books and access to technology and a place where is a neutral ground in our community where people could see themselves and everyone benefiting? Oh no. And so I took that back to the larger community and said, listen, this is what happened. And overwhelmingly, the community said, we want our library and we want temporary services right now. And if it's a FEMA trailer, we will take it. So it's again how you organize, how you bring those voices together, but how you also not allow one section of your community to be that loudest voice and therefore kind of winning out. But as a result, creating a win-win so that everyone again can see that they matter in the recovery of our community.
Yeah.
So that's what I remember.
Yeah. That's such a power and equity issue because I know in traditional planning processes often big sections of the population often are left out because it's hard to participate in certain ways.
Yeah, it's true, but it was also that example of how the reason Broadmoor was able to raise millions and build these incredible partnerships, external partnerships, and even keeping the community engaged was that we had the need. So if we didn't have people living in FEMA trailers, if we didn't have a school that was not back, if we didn't have a library, that we could fight for in the same area where the needs were the greatest, then no one will be giving you anything because you can take care of yourself. So it was an example to the strong that they needed the weak. But at the same time, when we looked at the strong, well, they were rebuilding their houses. When they rebuilt, they were able to do landscaping. So that's what we as a community could point to say, Broadmoor is coming back better than we were before, and we're coming back stronger. So again, that example of weak needing the strong, and the strong needing the weak. And collectively, we were able to bring our community back. First of all, the trauma, which you say is unsustainable, seems to have been sustained quite well from where I sit. I haven't stopped since Katrina. I haven't.
Yeah.
So, because it is a priority and because it is a pressure cooker, meaning that we cannot stop because we cannot wait. I think the examples, we've lived through them, whether that was the last hurricane season in 2020 when we were in the eye of 8 different storms. When I am forewarned about the hurricane season that we're preparing for now for 2021, that usually begins June 1, I'm being told to expect storms, hurricanes beginning in May. And then when you think about not just flooding that has occurred in New Orleans during these periods of time, but how we have seen our neighboring states and cities be impacted as well. So the writing is clearly on the wall, and the sense of urgency, yes, it is now, which is why it's been a priority for me as mayor to get this infrastructure work done. When we got here in 2018 of May, less than 1% of a federal allocation in 2016 of an amount of $2.4 billion was spent. So when I think about the past 2 years, almost 3, in a very short period of time, we're up to 20% of spending that money. Unprecedented in the history of this city. So we don't have time. When I think about the subsidence, when I think about the coastal erosion, when I think about the thought that New Orleans will be underwater by 2030, they throw that out there, it's very scary. And where you can only be by the river is where you would be protected. So we know that we want to make sure New Orleans is here for another 300 years. And in order to do that, we're going to have to change how we live with water, meaning live with it in a way that we're holding it, that we're being more innovative in our approaches. So whether that is the $145 million, that we've been spending for activating bioswales and drainage parks throughout the city, we're seeing how they're working, and residents are seeing them working. So whether that's Pontilli, we'll be cutting the ribbon there, Hagen Lafitte, City Park is underway. So we're holding millions of gallons of water. So this is our way out, we believe, but also looking at drainage as an entire system and not focusing on one aspect of the system, like sewage and water board, for example, or just the bioswales. Well, what I would like to see, I think where from the start of this, thinking post-Katrina, where government wasn't prioritizing green and blue infrastructure, to 15 years later, we are. So that's progress. So what I would like to see in this past 15 years, how we have moved through recovery, we've also lost or gained individuals, meaning moving to New Orleans, that have had no experience with how we have to live with water, and how we have had a history of flooding due to rainwater. This has been going on, but for some reason, it's new. It's not new. So I think that is the tension as well, of bringing people along, educating them who've chosen to move here post-Katrina, which is great. But at the same time, have a better understanding of how far we've come, where we are, and why we're flooding due to rainwater, and especially now with climate change, which is real, how these storms come, you get bursts of rain, inches, so many inches in less than an hour, that cause us to flood. And with the system, it's almost a bathtub. You keep that water running and the bathtub starts to overflow. Even though you let the plug out, it doesn't mean that the pumps aren't working. It means that you have too much water. So, and you don't start seeing in that bathtub the water going down until it gets down. Then you start seeing it move fast, and you're like, wow, it just started to move fast. No, it's been moving fast all along. So it's a need for education, but a willingness of all of our residents, who I perceive as leaders in this community, of course, being from New Orleans, as well as those who have moved to New Orleans, but through education, being able to embrace the changes of our thought process, as well as the need for improved infrastructure and what it will take to meet the needs of climate change today, how it's impacting our daily life. It's real. So it's hopefully through that education and democratizing information that people will digest it, learn from it, and therefore modify their actions accordingly. One example is the need to clean this city up. People trash in the city left and right. But at the same time, they want things to drain fast. Stop trashing the city. That's really a pet peeve of mine. But that's something I just don't understand. But it's happening every day, and it's our own people. Well, I think it requires us to care. I think it's very simple. I don't think it's rocket science at all. But I do believe it comes with caring about the environment and caring and understanding how we all play a role in demonstrating the care. And so when I think about stewardship, it absolutely is rooted in having the knowledge, but also the ability to educate others, bringing them along, but not just through talk, but in real action on the ground, and demonstrating and utilizing assets that we've already invested in to show how if we just tweaked our behavior a little bit, then we will make progress and just continue to make progress every step of the way.
Do you think about some of the kind of bigger questions like around relocation and not just Broadmoor, multiple neighborhoods, some of these really big questions about waterfronts and areas that are below sea level and the kinds of, I wouldn't even say sacrifices, but the really tough decisions that we're going to have to make. How do you, I think some of those will require the kinds of political buy-in and partnership and cross-sector work and building common narratives that you were able to do after the storm in Broadmoor. How do you see that playing out or happening in the years ahead?
So when I think about that, I think about Venetian Isles, and every time I'm, facing hurricane season, it's your lower lying areas that are outside of the flood protection system like Venetian Isles. And the reality is, based on what we know and based on what we're seeing, it's going away. And I think that we, government, plays a role in that, meaning not only through education, but identifying innovative ways to where we can move people. Bottom line. It's tough conversations to have, but I think it requires the courage necessary to make those tough decisions and to be open and honest with our people and with showing them, and they're living there, they know, they know. But I think the change can come when we, government, have demonstrated that there is something on the table to where we can relocate our people. The other is giving them the alternative of what does that look like? Where would they be relocated? How would they fit into that process? But ensuring that their voices will be embedded in that every step of the way. So kind of removing all fear and all doubt that you care about them. Because it all goes back to caring about the people and showing them that you care about them and making those decisions and taking those steps to get them out of harm's way. We have great examples of that in other places. Even Austin, Texas has began, to buying out some of their residents and relocating them. It's not new. And I do believe that that has to be a tool in our toolbox that we utilize, but we have to adequately fund it. But it speaks to the infrastructure, right? And the opportunities. And when you think about the current federal administration with an infrastructure focus, that this is an opportunity. Maybe it's coming sooner rather than later. But I know that will be something that I would be advocating for when I think about infrastructure and safety for this city and our residents. Well, one galvanizing is getting people to understand that coastal erosion is real. Losing a football field of water every day is a real thing. And I think that we're going to have to show people that, whether that is doing a flyover. Sometimes you really have to show people how we're impacted, and they have to see it for themselves. I think that could be a galvanizing force. Even when we show them the trash that's in drains. We pulled out I don't know how many tons of trash. I mean, that should be galvanized, but I'm waiting for that to pick up, to kick off, so people stop trashing this city and dumping everywhere. And then not in my backyard, but you're going to go dump in somebody else's yard? I don't understand that concept. But it's something that is a priority, I know, for me, and one that we really have to solve in this city. But I know that I can't do it by myself. It's going to be trying to change those behaviors and attitudes of people in our city to stop trashing her. I think every neighborhood is different, and I think that whatever the outreach needs to be tailored to that particular neighborhood. The way it collects water, the way it may flood during a rain event, and then also areas that may not take on any water at all. So getting those people who live in areas, high, dry, safe ground, to care about those in areas that are like Gentilly, for example, where we have invested millions so that we can keep and hold water, preventing it from running, into people's houses, quite frankly. So I think it's a combination of that cross, sector, bringing people across neighborhood lines to have an appreciation and an understanding for how people are having to live with flood water, as well as live with green and blue infrastructure that's actually working. But it really is just about bringing people together and listening to them, and not just listening, but tailoring initiatives or projects that are aligned with what they want to see.
It seems like the neighborhood scale is going to be important in that process.
Oh, I mean, everything happens at the neighborhood level, and the world's greatest experts on where they live are the people who live in the neighborhoods. And so I just think that, if we're going to be intentional about everyone being safe, then it will have to happen at that neighborhood level. And once, even where we've made strong investments in green and blue infrastructure, and they can see that it's working, that's a way as well, bringing those community members out there to, going out there and looking punch drink, but you can see how we're collecting the water. You can take your pictures, and you will know prior to the infrastructure, how you flooded, and seeing post infrastructure, how you're not taking in water in your home any longer. Mama, Mayor, everything.
Seated.
Oh, you know it.